Have you ever just, stopped and considered that beneath all the noise of daily life, there might be this hidden language? Like a surprising order to the universe that hints at something. Well, something far more connected than we usually perceive. Today, that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking a deep dive into that very idea. So, our mission here in this deep dive is to really explore these intriguing, sometimes really unexpected alignments,
Hmm.
between cutting edge quantum physics on one hand
Right.
and ancient spiritual wisdom on the other. We'll be looking at things like Christian pantheism, Taoism, various mystical traditions too.
Exactly. And look, this isn't about giving you some rigid formula or, fixed dogma. Not at all. It's more about uncovering what many traditions describe as, well, a kind of divine breath,
Hmm.
something animating all of existence, a unity that maybe deep down your soul remembers, even when your mind's caught up in the everyday stuff. Our quest, really, is to find something, maybe stranger, older, truer, by trying to align scientific understanding with those moments of silence, a rational inquiry with a real sense of reverence, the quantum field maybe, with spiritual teachings.
It really feels like an invitation, doesn't it, to journey right into the heart of reality itself. So, okay, are you ready? Let's unpack this. We're kicking things off with a concept that honestly radically shifts how we see reality. It's what scientists call the participatory universe.
Hmm.
And the core idea here is that measurement, well, it isn't passive. Werner Heisenberg, one of the pioneers of quantum mechanics, he famously observed that the very act of measuring disturbs the system.
And that's just incredibly significant. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, imagine a particle. It doesn't exist in just one place, but in what's called a superposition.
Yeah.
Think of it like a combination of all possible states, sort of a cloud of probability. It's only at the very moment it's observed or measured that its wave function collapses. It snaps into a single, concrete event. And look, this isn't just theory. It's measurable physics. It's been confirmed by foundational work from people like Dirac back in 1930 and von Neumann in 32.
Right. And the classic illustration, the one everyone sort of knows, is the double slit experiment. Richard Feynman, another giant in physics, he often used it to show how something like light behaves like a wave, right? Interfering with itself
Yeah.
until we actually observe it. The second we try to see which path it takes, boom, it acts like a particle. The really profound takeaway here is that observation literally changes the outcome.
It truly does, and it stretches our imagination even further, really. John Wheeler's delayed choice experiment back in 1978. Well, that pushed things by suggesting that even measurements made after a particle has gone through a slit can influence how it behaved before. It's almost as if time itself kind of bends around the presence of consciousness. Wheeler himself put it perfectly, I think. No phenomenon is a phenomenon until it is an observed phenomenon. Now, what exactly counts as an observer? Well, that's a whole other can of worms. It's the subject of pretty active debate. Some interpretations, like from von Neumann and Wigner, they actually suggested human consciousness plays a direct role. Others, like the Cubism interpretation, Fuchs put this forward in 2010, they argue it's maybe less about some universal consciousness and more about how our individual beliefs, the information we gain, updates the quantum system. But really, in any of these interpretations, the universe fundamentally becomes participatory. That clear line we draw between subject and object, between us and reality, it starts to look, well, a lot more fluid.
That whole idea that reality actually responds to observation. It's mind-bending, isn't it? But okay, if our consciousness is somehow involved in this collapsing process, what does that imply about what consciousness is? Could it be, I don't know, more than just a biological byproduct, maybe even a catalyst for becoming?
It's a really compelling question. And when you look at it through the lens of, say, spiritual teachings, think about Jesus' words, do not worry about tomorrow. You could almost see that as prescribing a kind of quantum presence. It's about living deeply in the now, right? Without that illusion of having total control over everything. And similarly, the kingdom of God is within you. Maybe that's not some fixed destination, but more like a state of dynamic unfolding, of becoming. So in a quantum universe, maybe true faith isn't about clinging desperately to specific outcomes. Maybe it's more about surrender, a willingness to just dwell in the uncertainty.
Okay, so presence isn't just an illusion then. Not at all. It might actually be a creative act. And you can see Jesus demonstrating this, can't you? Through what you could call radical attentiveness. Think about his encounters, the woman at the well, that child in the crowd, Zacchaeus up in the tree. Each time it was like an act of collapsing potential into a moment of really profound divine recognition. So for you, listening right now, maybe approaching each moment with this kind of quantum presence means acting as if it truly matters because, well, it seems reality does respond. Life seems to listen when you engage with it, truthfully.
Indeed, observation in a really profound sense seems to call reality into being. I mean,
Just think about how a person's identity gets shaped by how they're seen. A child who's observed with love and acceptance, they grow into a different person than one who's constantly scrutinized with suspicion, right? Their very being is shaped by the quality of that observation. And this offers a really compelling parallel too. Quantum superposition, where all possibilities exist at once. In some ways, it mirrors the idea of divine immanence, God's presence within the cosmos. So God isn't just outside somewhere. Perhaps God is the field of all possibility itself, the breath within the wave, both observer and observed. When ancient texts like Genesis say we're made in our image, maybe it's not about a physical likeness. Maybe it's about us being these waves of possibility. Carrying divinity not as some label, but as fundamental structure of our being, a reflection of that ultimate potential.
Wow, that's a fascinating thought. But okay, if all these possibilities are constantly swirling around, why don't we experience this quantum magic, all the time in our everyday lives? It feels like there's a kind of fading song happening, isn't there?
There is, yeah. And that's exactly where the scientific concept of decoherence comes in. Decoherence is basically the process where quantum systems lose their coherence, their
Yeah.
unity of states, usually when they interact with their environment. Imagine trying to hear a single pure note in a huge stadium just full of static. That's kind of why we don't see quantum weirdness in our big macroscopic world.
Mm.
Those interactions with the environment, they make systems look classical very, very fast.
Mm.
Zurich did a lot of work on this back in 2003. And interestingly, there's also something called the quantum Zeno effect. Misra and Sudarshan proposed this in 77. It's this idea that repeatedly observing a system can actually prevent it from changing. It's almost like you could freeze a moment in time just by constant attention.
It's quite profound, really, to think about how this resonates with some spiritual narratives. Like, could we maybe interpret the fall in Genesis not just as, a moral slip up, but maybe as a kind of phase transition, a sort of decoherence in quantum terms?
That's a really powerful analogy, yeah. Before the fall, you can argue, ancient texts suggest humanity existed in this state of, coherence, almost like an unmeasured quantum particle, with all potential selves existing simultaneously, uncollapsed. And then gaining knowledge of good and evil. You can interpret that as engaging with external measurement, right?
Yeah.
Specific information. And that decohered the original state. So the fall, maybe it's not so much about divine exile, but more about the soul's entanglement with its own surroundings, the gaining of information that disrupts that primordial wholeness. And what's truly astonishing now is that quantum biology is actually revealing how life itself seems to actively resist decoherence. I mean, think about photosynthesis. It's nearly 100% efficient. Engel and others showed in 2007 that light energy explores all paths simultaneously for maximum capture. It's incredible. Or how migratory birds navigate. There's research suggesting they use entangled electron pairs in their retinas to literally see Earth's magnetic field. Ritz and Gauger explored this. Birds might not just be navigating by instinct. They could be navigating by entanglement. But then there's enzyme catalysis. Quantum tunneling, where a particle just appears on the other side of an energy barrier and lets reactions happen millions of times faster than classical chemistry allows. So this quantum weirdness, it isn't a glitch in life. It seems to be a fundamental requirement. Brooks in 2017 even suggested it might help proofread DNA.
Okay, so what does this understanding of decoherence mean for us, then, in our lives? It can help explain why we don't just experience magic all the time, right? Our presence, our kind of natural coherent state, it seems to decohere pretty quickly in a world that's just saturated with noise, constant stimulation, digital distractions, endless external measurements.
And the spiritual solution offered by so many traditions, it aligns beautifully. It's often about a return to stillness. Practice like meditation, prayer, fasting, solitude. Maybe they work by reducing that environmental noise, both literally and, spiritually, allowing the signal of your own intrinsic awareness to, once again, shape the field, to sort of regain that coherence.
Right. And speaking of these unseen forces that connect us, let's talk about one of the strangest but also most foundational truths in modern physics. Quantum entanglement. It's this phenomenon where, two or more particles get so deeply linked that the state of one immediately affects the other, no matter how far apart they are. Miles, light years, doesn't matter.
And crucially, this isn't just some wild theory anymore. It's been empirically confirmed, over and over. Countless experiments. We're talking about work based on John Bell's theorem from '64 and those really careful loophole-free Bell tests done by people like Ronald Hansen in 2015, and the extensive work by Anton Zeilinger's group too. These experiments, they definitively show that nature itself is non-local. There are connections that just defy our everyday understanding of space and time.
What's so compelling about this, for me anyway, is how directly it points to this, radical form of interconnectedness.
It absolutely does. It really echoes what Teilhard de Chardin famously suggested, right? We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. Entanglement implies that separateness, in the most fundamental sense, maybe isn't the ultimate reality. And this connects so profoundly to teachings like Jesus's, whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. In a quantum world, the idea of absolute individuality becomes less about isolated units and more about a matrix of relationship. This quantum interconnectedness could really be seen as a physical echo of what spiritual traditions have always intuited, that our souls are entangled, not just with each other, but maybe with the divine itself. Think about the traditional idea of God's omnipresence, like in Jeremiah, am I a God near at hand, not a God far off? Quantum non-locality gives this concept a whole fresh dimension, doesn't it? God isn't limited by time or distance. Perhaps the divine is woven right into the quantum field itself. Wherever particles are entangled, you could say God is the coherence holding them together. What if the divine is the entanglement itself, the force that maintains unity across all things?
Wow, so it's maybe not just about going to a specific building or place to find a connection to the divine. Perhaps it's more about recognizing this entangled field that you are already a part of, wherever you happen to be.
And this naturally opens up what we could maybe call an entangled ethics. From this viewpoint, love. Well, love could almost be considered a quantum force.
Yeah.
Hurting another person isn't just a moral wrong, it's like creating a physical discord, a ripple of incoherence in this universal field. And conversely, healing another, that could release a wave of coherence, helping to harmonize the whole system. Morality, then, might be seen as a kind of quantum alignment with this deep field of divine relationality.
That's a really powerful way to think about our impact, isn't it? How we affect the world and each other. And speaking of reality being shaped by these unseen forces, what if our entire universe works like a giant hologram, where the depth and solidity we perceive is actually some kind of projection? That brings us to the holographic principle.
Yeah, this is a truly mind-bending idea, proposed by Juan Maldacena back in 1998. It suggests that all the information within a 3D volume of space like our universe is actually encoded on its 2D boundary, like the surface of a sphere. So what we perceive as depth, as 3 dimensions, might just be a projection from that lower dimensional surface. Space itself, according to this thinking, could emerge from entangled quantum information. It really is, as J.B.S. Haldane said, stranger than we can imagine.
Okay, so when Genesis says we are made in the image of God, maybe this image isn't physical at all. Perhaps it's structural, like a hologram, where the part somehow reflects the whole.
Precisely. That's a core property of hologram, right? Each little piece contains the whole picture. It's maybe from a different angle. This suggests that you as an individual aren't fundamentally separate from the divine. You might be considered, a unique angle through which the divine experiences itself or sees itself. And this resonates so deeply with teachings like the kingdom of God is within you, and also whatever you do to them, you do to me. From this holographic perspective, every act of cruelty could be seen as distorting that mirror, that reflection, while every act of compassion makes the reflection clearer. And this also touches on consciousness itself, maybe being a projection, John Wheeler's famous phrase, it from bit, the idea that reality fundamentally arises from information, bits of information. So what is prayer then in this light? Maybe it's the moment when our individual projection turns inward toward the source to perceive the underlying light, the fundamental information.
This really shifts how we might perceive ourselves, doesn't it? Perhaps you aren't just a fragment. Maybe you are the whole, reflected in a unique way. You're like an interface, perhaps, through which the universe becomes aware of itself. And every time you choose love or forgiveness or speak truth, maybe you're causing ripples in that fundamental code, realigning the image, clarifying the mirror. Okay, this leads us to a really fundamental question. How does life itself exhibit such intricate coordination, such apparent intentionality? I mean, when at its core, it's made of these random-seeming particles. How does a bird fly thousands of miles and find the exact same tree again? It's baffling.
That's precisely where quantum biology steps in. It's this fascinating field exploring how subatomic phenomena, things once thought way too fragile for the warm, wet environment of cells, are actually central to how life works. Take photosynthesis, for instance. We mentioned its efficiency. Engel and others showed how quantum coherence allows light energy to basically explore all possible paths simultaneously, to find the most efficient route, near 100% efficiency. It's like life instinctively chooses the path that best preserves the flow of energy. And then there's that truly astonishing example of bird navigation we touched on. Research by Ritz, Gager, and others suggests these birds use entangled electron spins and proteins in their eyes' cryptochromes to literally see the Earth's magnetic field lines. So they might not be navigating by instinct alone in the classical sense. They might be navigating by quantum entanglement. That's spooky action at a distance happening inside a living creature. And think about enzyme catalysis too, how enzymes speed up reactions. Studies show that quantum tunneling, that weird thing where a particle just appears on the other side of an energy barrier, enables enzymes to work millions of times faster than classical chemistry would predict. So again, quantum weirdness isn't some glitch. It seems to be a fundamental requirement for life as we know it. Brooks even suggested quantum coherence might help cells proofread DNA, catching errors. So all these discoveries, they really point towards a powerful conclusion, don't they? Life isn't just some mechanical byproduct. It seems to be a coherent dance, a dance of energy, intention, and maybe what you could call a profound field intelligence. Living systems seem to actively work to avoid decoherence. They're constantly striving to maintain this coherent, harmonized state, humming with an inherent order that really does echo those ancient sacred ideas.
It gives such new depth to ancient texts, doesn't it? Like Genesis 2.7, and the Lord God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And in Hebrew, that word ruach, it means breath, but also spirit or wind.
Exactly. And what if that breath, what if it isn't just a one-time act? What if it's a constant quantum pulse, a continuous act of creation? This breath could be seen as an ongoing entanglement with the very field of being, a literal participation in the divine self-expression. Life, from this perspective, is coherence. It's the sustained harmony of pattern, energy, intention. Living systems, just by their nature, seem to hum with this sacred order as they resist the forces of decoherence.
So maybe what keeps us alive isn't just oxygen and food. Maybe it's also this underlying state of being in tune.
Yeah.
If life actively resists decoherence, then maybe you are a walking quantum miracle, a unique expression of coherence wrapped in flesh, participating in this constant divine pulse. How might thinking like that change your everyday experience? Maybe, just like those birds following invisible stars, you too are being led by something deeper than just logic or language. Maybe it's resonance. Now, most of us tend to think of empty space as, well, just that, empty, a void, nothing there. But what if what we call nothing is actually alive, trembling with energy, a constant hum of potentials?
Well, quantum field theory proposes exactly that. The vacuum state, as it's called, isn't empty at all. It's described as seething with transient particles, virtual particles popping in and out of existence, constant fluctuations of energy. As Maloney put it back in '94, it's almost like nothing is a field of dancing somethings. It's alive with something called zero-point energy. That's a fundamental energy that exists even in totally empty space at absolute zero temperature, a constant hum of potential. And the Casimir effect provides remarkable proof of this. Casimir predicted it in '48. Lamoureux confirmed it experimentally in '97. If you take two uncharged, perfectly parallel metal plates and put them very close together in a vacuum, they actually attract each other. Why? Because the quantum vacuum fluctuations, all that virtual particle activity, it's slightly more restricted between the plates than outside them. This difference creates a tiny but measurable force. It's like empty space itself pushes, nothingness attracts. Distance, in a weird way, collapses into intimacy, and it gets even wilder. There's something called the dynamical Casimir effect. Wilson and others observed this in 2011. Basically, by rapidly oscillating a boundary, they used a simulated mirror. They could create real photons, actual light particles, free from the vacuum. So the void, it turns out, can be kind of pumped to yield something from what seems like nothing.
Wow. That resonates so deeply with some ancient wisdom, doesn't it? Like chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching. It is the emptiness inside that makes the vessel useful.
Absolutely. Taoism has always viewed emptiness not as a lack, but as active potential. The Tao is empty but inexhaustible. And similarly, think about Jesus' blessed are the poor in spirit. You could see that as advocating for a kind of divine vacuum, an emptying of ego. It's an embrace of emptiness, maybe because, well, only the empty can truly be filled. So drawing a parallel here, it suggests the divine gives rise to consciousness, to the cosmos, not from something already existing, but from pure potential. That let there be light moment in Genesis, it almost echoes the quantum vacuum's sea of latent form. The void is not void, it's pregnant with light. And the dynamical Casimir effect, it's almost like a modern echo of creation coming from the deep. It suggests that moments of profound crisis or energetic shifts could actually be mechanisms through which new divine energy enters our time.
So even silence speaks. Even empty space breathes. And maybe even your loneliness in its deepest sense is surrounded by some kind of invisible embrace. Maybe you are never truly alone. Maybe there are these unseen forces pulling you towards truth, towards love, towards what feels like home. Our universe isn't silent, it vibrates. It's like this grand unfolding song, a symphony of existence.
And the quantum harmonic oscillator. It's one of the simplest yet most profound models in physics. It basically describes how things vibrate, how particles vibrate, how atoms oscillate, how energy organizes itself into these stable, repeating patterns. Now, unlike classical oscillators, like a pendulum, quantum ones never truly rest. They always have some motion. They also have quantized energy levels, meaning they can only exist at specific frequencies, specific energy levels, not just any energy. And they possess zero-point energy even at absolute zero temperature. Planck showed this way back in 1900. Griffith's textbook describes it well. And the amazing thing is how ubiquitous this model is. It applies to chemical bonds between atoms, to vibrations in crystal lattices, phonons, atomic oscillations, even roughly to the stable orbits of planets. What it teaches us is that energy isn't smooth, it's quantized, it comes in packets. Systems seem to prefer discrete frequencies. The universe isn't just a monologue. It really is like a symphony, if you think about that. Then maybe you and I, maybe everything, is literally composed of vibrating fields, arranged in harmonies and dissonances. You could almost say the soul isn't solid, it is sung.
That connects so deeply with ancient mysticism, doesn't it? You think about Hinduism, the universe born from the sound or in Christianity, the morning stars singing together. In Islam, the beauty of the Quran recited like a melody. And in Taoism, the Tao is heard in profound silence, in the underlying rhythm.
Mm-hmm. And modern physics now, maybe in a metaphorical sense, but maybe more, it confirms these ancient insights. Everything vibrates, everything resonates, everything emerges from frequency. If we take that idea seriously, then maybe the voice of the divine isn't words, maybe it's waveform. Maybe you could be seen not as made of static things, but of dynamic tones, not as separate parts, but of intricate vibrating patterns.
So maybe you are a unique note in this vast song of existence. You're part of the great music. And the composer, in some profound way, never stops listening. Okay, let's shift gears slightly and consider quantum logic and compassion. Starting with quantum algorithms, like Shor's algorithm for factoring or Grover's for searching, the way they work is fascinating. They explore many possibilities, many paths, all at once in parallel, and then they sort of collapse towards the optimal answer.
It's a completely different way of knowing, isn't it? Fundamentally nonlinear.
It really is. And it offers, I think, a beautiful parallel to the concept of grace. Grace, in many spiritual traditions, it suspends condemnation, doesn't it? It holds the sinner and the saint, all the possibilities, together in a field of potential, like a superposition. Grace waits. It's patient. And think about this. When we judge others, what are we doing? We often collapse their superposition, right? We define them, we fix them into a single, often limited state based on one action or trait. But quantum physics teaches us that systems, well, they aren't fixed until they're measured, until they're observed in a certain way. So, could grace, in a deep, almost metaphysical sense, could it be the refusal to prematurely measure? When Jesus says, "Judge not, lest you be judged," maybe it's not just good moral advice. Maybe it's a profound insight into the very nature of reality and interaction. The problem isn't collapse itself, perhaps, but premature collapse. Judging before the full waveform of possibility has had a chance to unfold.
That's a fascinating way to put it. And from the perspective, divine intelligence, it might act holistically, not just step by step linearly. The divine's decisions, if you can call them that, could be seen more like evolving quantum patterns, not like linear commands sent down a chain, what looks like delay or even chaos from our limited human perspective. Maybe it's a complex process unfolding across multiple timelines of potential, all converging towards a deeper resolution. It aligns with the wisdom of the Tao, right? The river flows with what is. It's reflected in some of Jesus' paradoxical sayings, like, the first shall be last. We could also think about something we might call the cosmic entropy of ego. The ego, in this kind of analogy, is like a thermodynamic machine. It resists change. It clings tightly to fixed forms, to its identity. And it requires a lot of energy to maintain its illusions, its separateness. This constant effort increases what you'd call spiritual entropy, a kind of inner disorder and resistance. Much like a physical system tends toward chaos when energy is constantly expended just to maintain an unnatural, rigid state.
The ego might burn brightly, seem powerful, but spirit, by contrast, it flows cool, effortlessly. So surrendering the ego in this light is maybe like dissolving that rigid self-boundary, allowing energy to flow freely, spontaneously. This could lead to what might be described as a low-entropy life, a state of low resistance, a state of being that saints and mystics across traditions have often called grace.
That offers such a powerful reframe, doesn't it? Your past isn't your fixed measurement. It's not who you are permanently. You are perhaps a field of sacred probabilities, constantly unfolding, capable of change. And maybe your words, your actions, your very presence could emerge not from fear or that rigid logic of the ego, but from a profound state of coherence, from grace.
Now let's return to that core quantum idea. All phenomena seem to require observation to become fully real. This leads us to a truly profound, maybe ultimate question. What if the final, all-encompassing observer isn't something outside the universe at all? What if it is the universe itself, alive, aware, and constantly watching its own unfolding. I mean, physicists like Eugene Wigner back in the 60s and more recently Henry Stapp, they've extensively explored these deep links between quantum mechanics and consciousness, suggesting that a participating observer is somehow fundamental to reality itself.
And this resonates so strongly with certain lines in Scripture, doesn't it? Like, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, from Proverbs. Or Hebrews saying, nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. The implication seems pretty clear. There's perhaps no unobserved corner of reality. Everything is witnessed.
Indeed, it suggests the possibility that the universe is being continuously observed, perhaps by a cosmic consciousness, an eternal witness. In the pantheistic view, which some theological sources explore, the divine isn't just separate. God is the observer, the observed, and the very process of observation itself. So every quantum collapse, every moment, a possibility becomes concrete. Maybe that could be seen as a moment of divine attention, a conscious act of witnessing that brings reality into being. It brings to mind that profound name revealed to Moses, I am. Just pure presence, pure observation. And when you think back to Wheeler's delayed choice experiment where future choices seem to influence the past, it offers this almost poetic parallel. Maybe there's a kind of divine patience at play, where the divine waits until the observation is, well, until it's love, and then reality in its deepest, truest sense appears.
This really leads us towards ideas like Teilhard de Chardin's omega point, doesn't it? That vision of a final convergence, where all of evolution, all of consciousness, folds towards some state of ultimate coherence, maximum consciousness, perfect unity.
And in quantum terms, you could perhaps interpret that as the final collapse of the universal wave function, where everything folds inward until maybe only pure being remains. Not a separate being observing, but being itself. And consider the insights coming from the study of black holes. People like Hawking, Bekenstein, Susskind, Maldacena. Their work suggests that information is never truly lost when something falls into a black hole. It gets encoded, maybe on the event horizon. What falls in doesn't just disappear. It changes state. Its information is preserved, perhaps in a higher order form. Now, this offers a compelling scientific analogy, doesn't it, for ancient concepts like resurrection. The idea that information, or essence, isn't destroyed, but is encoded in some higher order field. It echoes John 12.24. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Death is transformation, not annihilation.
So thinking about all this, perhaps you are not just some random accident happening inside the universe. Instead, what if you are a conscious participant in the very act of its becoming? What if you are, in some way, the witness the divine uses to see itself? Wow. Okay, this deep dive has really carried us through some vast terrain, hasn't it? From the tiniest particles all the way up to the grand sweep of consciousness. From superposition to spirit, we've explored these connections that seem to transcend any single scientific theory or, any single spiritual tradition.
Absolutely. And at its core, the message that seems to keep emerging, at least for me, is this. The cosmos breathes. Emptiness is never truly empty. What looks like randomness can contain a deep underlying logic. And reality at its very heart, it doesn't seem to be a static machine, but more like a living, breathing, continuous unfolding. And those teachings we've touched on, from the kingdom of God is within you, to the blessing of being poor in spirit, and that radical interconnectedness in whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. They all seem to resonate with this profound underlying idea, don't they? The Tao calls it the way. The physicist might refer to it as the field. The mystic often describes it as the divine within, different words perhaps for a similar reality.
It's incredibly powerful to consider that maybe we are fundamentally entangled, that we are in some deep sense observed, and maybe, just maybe, we are loved into being. Remember the double-slit experiment again. Watching changes the world. The observation matters. So consider this. When you choose love instead of fear, compassion instead of cynicism, when you choose presence instead of constant distraction, are you, in your own small but significant way, collapsing a universe into meaning? Your attention, your intention, your love.
Yeah.
Maybe it's profoundly sacred. Maybe it really does shape reality.
Of course, look, there's no final proof here. No ultimate formula that just ties it all up neatly with a bow. Even the divine, if it exists, seems to delight in hiding within paradox, within waveforms, dreams, tragedies, births. But maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the goal isn't to solve the mystery in some final way. Maybe it's to enter into it, to live inside the question, to become the very breath between the equations.
So maybe consider yourself as the breath of the cosmos. You are not separate from this grand, mysterious unfolding. You're not exiled from the light. You are, in some profound way, the hologram, the field, the entanglement, the voice, maybe even the witness that the divine uses to see itself. So now, Maybe you can collapse the waveform one last time, not into fear, not into some rigid theory, but into presence, into this very moment you are in, into the truth that is quietly whispering right behind your own heartbeat.
The breath is breathing you. You are not alone.
And
Well, that might just be enough.